Bible Verse Daily. Learn one verse every day. Most people think Psalm chapter 23 is a comfort verse, something you read at funerals, something you put on a sympathy card, and they are not wrong exactly, but they are missing something far more powerful. Psalm chapter 23 is not primarily about comfort, it is about courage. When David wrote the words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," he was not writing from a place of peace. Biblical scholars believe David wrote this psalm during one of the most difficult periods of his life, possibly during the rebellion of his own son Absalom, when David fled Jerusalem barefoot weeping through the Mount of Olives. He had lost his throne, his city, his family. He was a fugitive king with every reason to despair, and into that darkness he spoke these words, not as wishful thinking, not as a memory of better days, as a declaration. That changes everything about how we should read it. The shepherd metaphor was not soft in the ancient Near East. Shepherds faced wolves, thieves, harsh terrain, and extreme weather. They carried weapons. They fought. When David called God his shepherd, he was invoking the image of fierce, protective care, not gentle pasture living. And the phrase "I shall not want" is even stronger than it sounds in English. The Hebrew word is exer. It does not mean hoping for the best. It means actively lacking nothing. Present tense. Right now, not someday, not eventually, now. This is the verse we are going to explore today, because you may have read it 100 times, but there is a good chance you have never heard the full story behind it. To understand Psalm chapter 23, you need to know who David actually was before he became king. He was the youngest of 8 sons. While his older brothers trained as warriors, David's job was to watch the family sheep in the hills of Bethlehem. That was not a prestigious role. It was lonely, dangerous, and underestimated. But it shaped everything about how David understood God. Shepherds in ancient Israel did not simply lead sheep from a distance. They lived with them. They moved with them through the wilderness of Judah, which was harsh terrain, rocky and dry, with real predators. David himself wrote elsewhere that he had killed both a lion and a bear with his bare hands while protecting the flock. That is the shepherd he is drawing on in this psalm. And there is a crucial political dimension to the shepherd metaphor that modern readers almost entirely miss. In the ancient Near East, the most powerful kings described themselves as shepherds of their people. The great Babylonian king Hammurabi called himself the shepherd of the oppressed. Egyptian pharaohs held a shepherd's crook as one of their symbols of power. In that world, the shepherd was not a humble peasant. The shepherd was the ruler. So when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he is making a political statement as much as a spiritual one. He is saying, the true ruler over my life is not a pharaoh, not an emperor, not even a human king. It is YHWH, the personal God of Israel. David wrote this with a shepherd's hands and a king's insight, and that combination is what gives the psalm its extraordinary weight. Let's go into the original Hebrew, because the translation you grew up with, while beautiful, actually softens what David wrote. The psalm opens with the Hebrew word YHWH. This is not a title like Lord or God. It is a name, the personal name of God, so sacred that most Jewish readers would not even pronounce it aloud. They would say Adonai, which means Lord, instead. So the very first word of Psalm chapter 23 in the original is the most intimate, most personal name for the divine, not the universe, not a higher power. YHWH, the God who exists, who was, who is, and who will be. The name comes from the Hebrew verb to be. Then comes the word roy, meaning shepherd. But notice the possessive, my shepherd. Not a shepherd, not the shepherd, mine. David is claiming a personal relationship. He is not describing God in the abstract. He is describing his own experience. Then the phrase "I shall not want" in Hebrew, this is lo exer. 2 words. Lo means not. Exer comes from the root chaser, meaning to lack, to decrease, to be without. Together it means I do not lack anything. But here is what most English translations miss. This is present tense. It is not a future hope. David is not saying someday I will not lack. He is making a present tense declaration in the middle of crisis. Right now, even in this, I lack nothing. That is a radical claim, not rational optimism, not positive thinking. It is a declaration that when God is your shepherd, your deepest needs are already met, even when your circumstances suggest otherwise, especially then. Psalm chapter 23 has been read and interpreted across 3,000 years and 2 major world religions. And those readings are fascinatingly different. In Jewish interpretation, the shepherd metaphor connects deeply to Moses. Moses was himself a shepherd when God first spoke to him from the burning bush. The entire Exodus narrative is structured around God as shepherd leading his people, Israel, through the wilderness to the promised land. When Jewish readers hear Psalm chapter 23, they hear echoes of that journey. The valley of the shadow of death is not just personal suffering, it is the wilderness. The table prepared before enemies is the promised land set against the kingdoms of Canaan. Christian interpretation pivots on one key text, John chapter 10 verse 11, where Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." This is a direct reference back to Psalm chapter 23. Jesus is explicitly claiming the role David described. For Christians, Psalm chapter 23 becomes a prophetic portrait of Christ, written 1,000 years before the Incarnation. Modern theologians debate what "I shall not want" actually promises. Some prosperity gospel teachers use this verse to claim that following God means material abundance, but most mainstream scholars strongly disagree. They argue that want in this context means lacking what is essential, what you truly need for life and purpose, not what you desire. And academic biblical scholars classify this as a psalm of trust, a genre designed precisely for moments when circumstances contradict faith. It is not a description of easy living, it is a script for how to speak when everything around you says the opposite. So what do you actually do with this verse when your life does not feel like green pastures? This is the hardest question, and it is the right one to ask. There is a version of this verse that gets preached as if trust in God is supposed to make hard things feel easy. As if saying "the Lord is my shepherd" should make your anxiety disappear, your finances stabilize, or your grief resolve. That version is dishonest. And David knew it was dishonest. He wrote this psalm while running for his life. The honest application looks different. First, notice what David does not say. He does not say "I feel peaceful." He does not say "everything is fine." He says "I shall not want." He makes a declaration about what is ultimately true, regardless of what he feels in the moment. This is the difference between comfort and courage. In practice, this means you can hold two things at once. You can be in real difficulty, facing real loss, experiencing real fear, and still declare that at the level of what ultimately matters, you are not lacking. You have access to guidance. You have a shepherd who has faced every terrain before you. Second, the phrase "my shepherd" is an invitation to personalize your relationship with God. Not a general belief in God, not a vague spiritual affiliation, a personal, named, active relationship. The most concrete application is this: whatever you are wanting right now, bring it specifically and directly into that relationship, not as a transaction, not as a request to a vending machine, as a conversation with a shepherd who knows the terrain better than you do, and who has been faithful to his flock for a very long time. Psalm chapter 23 verse 1 is one sentence, 7 words in English, 2 in Hebrew, and yet it contains enough to carry a person through a lifetime of difficulty. David was a real shepherd who wrote about a real God, using the most powerful metaphor available in his world. He declared in the middle of crisis that YHWH, the personal God, was his shepherd, and that because of that relationship he lacked nothing essential. Not someday. Right now, the Lord is your shepherd. You lack nothing that truly matters. If this verse study helped you go deeper, please like, comment, and subscribe to Bible Verse Daily for a new verse study every week. Hit the bell notification so you never miss one. New verse studies every week.